The grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed 2 in the morning when the gentle knocking began. Daniel Matthews paused in his late-night routine of checking on 8-year-old Sophie, wondering who could possibly be at his door at this hour. At 35, Daniel had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of single parenthood, where unexpected interruptions usually meant childhood emergencies, not mysterious visitors. The knocking came again, soft but insistent, and Daniel moved toward the front door with the careful caution that came from being solely responsible for his daughter's safety. Through the peephole, he could see a woman standing on his porch, her dark hair damp from the light rain that had been falling all evening. She appeared to be in her early 30s, wearing a simple light-colored dress that seemed inadequate for the cool October night. Even in the dim porch light, Daniel could see that she was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Daniel hesitated for a moment, weighing the wisdom of opening his door to a stranger in the middle of the night. But something about her posture, the way she stood with a mixture of vulnerability and quiet dignity, made him turn the deadbolt and slowly open the door. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," the woman said immediately, her voice soft but clear. "I know this must seem strange, but I was wondering if you could help me. My car broke down about 2 blocks from here, and my phone is dead." Daniel studied her face in the warm light spilling from his hallway. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that came from genuine warmth rather than careful styling. Her brown eyes held an exhaustion that went deeper than the late hour, and there was something in her expression that tugged at his memory. "Of course," Daniel said without hesitation, stepping back to let her into the warmth of his home. "Come in out of the rain. We can call someone for you, or I can take a look at your car if you'd like." As she stepped across the threshold, the woman looked around his living room with an expression that seemed both grateful and oddly familiar, as if she were seeing something she had expected to find. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the towel Daniel offered her for her damp hair. "I'm Rebecca Ann Sullivan, and I have to say, this is going to sound strange, but you feel familiar to me somehow." Daniel felt something shift in his chest at her words. A recognition that he couldn't quite place, but that felt surprisingly strong. "I'm Daniel Matthews," he replied, gesturing toward the comfortable couch. "Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee or tea to help you warm up?" "Coffee would be wonderful," Rebecca said, settling onto the couch with the careful grace of someone who had learned not to take kindness for granted. "And Daniel Matthews, that name feels familiar, too." As Daniel moved to the kitchen to start the coffee, he found himself studying Rebecca's profile from the corner of his eye. There was definitely something about her that resonated with him, a sense of connection that went beyond the simple act of helping a stranded stranger. "Rebecca Ann Sullivan," Daniel said thoughtfully as he returned with 2 steaming mugs. "Did you grow up around here?" Rebecca's eyes lit up with recognition. "I did actually, on Maple Street until I was about 12. Then my family moved to Portland when my father got a new job." She paused, studying Daniel's face with new attention. "Danny Matthews, you lived on Oak Street, didn't you? 3 blocks over from Maple." The memory hit Daniel like a warm wave of nostalgia. "Becca Sullivan, you had the tires swing in your backyard and your mother made the best chocolate chip cookies in the neighborhood. And you had the treehouse that every kid on the block wanted to visit," Rebecca replied, her face breaking into the first genuine smile Daniel had seen since she'd arrived. "You used to let me climb up there even though I was 2 years younger and your friends said girls weren't allowed." As they sat together in Daniel's living room, 23 years of separation seemed to dissolve into the comfortable familiarity of childhood friends who had never really forgotten each other. They talked about the summers they'd spent exploring the neighborhood, the elaborate games of hide and seek that had lasted until parents called them home for dinner, and the promise they'd made to stay friends forever. "I remember when you moved away," Daniel said quietly. "I was 14 and I thought I was too old to cry about a friend leaving, but I did anyway." "I cried, too," Rebecca admitted. "I kept meaning to write, but you know how it is when you're a kid. Time moves differently and suddenly months had passed and it felt too late." "What brought you back to town?" Daniel asked, though he noticed the way Rebecca's expression grew more complex when he posed the question. "I'm actually going through a divorce," Rebecca said honestly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned to speak difficult truths. "I've been driving around for the past few days trying to figure out where I want to start over. I ended up here because this was the last place I remember feeling completely safe and happy." Daniel felt his heart open completely to this woman who had been his closest childhood friend and was now sitting in his living room, beautiful and vulnerable and somehow exactly the same person he'd said goodbye to all those years ago. Becca, Daniel said gently. You said your car broke down, but is that really why you knocked on my door at 2 o'clock in the morning? Rebecca looked down at her coffee mug, and Daniel could see tears gathering in her eyes. I drove by this house 3 times tonight, she admitted quietly. I remembered that the Matthews family lived on Oak Street, and when I saw the number 247, I knew it was your house. Something about the way the porch light looked exactly the same as it did when we were kids. So, you didn't just happen to break down nearby. No, Rebecca said, looking up at him with complete honesty. My car is fine. I'm fine physically, but I've been driving around for 2 days, feeling more lost than I've ever felt in my life. And when I saw your house, it was like finding home again. Daniel sat down his coffee and moved to sit beside Rebecca on the couch, close enough to offer comfort, but careful not to invade her space. Becca, you said I felt familiar. What did you mean? Rebecca smiled through her tears, reaching out to touch Daniel's hand with the same unself-conscious affection she'd shown as a 12-year-old. I meant that sitting here with you feels like the safest I felt in years. Like coming home to someone who knew me before I learned to be afraid of trusting people. You can stay here tonight, Daniel said without hesitation. Sophie would love to meet you in the morning and we can figure out what comes next when you've had some rest. Sophie, my daughter, she's 8 and she's inherited the Matthews family tradition of making friends with anyone who needs one. Rebecca's smile grew warmer. I'd love to meet her. And, Daniel, thank you for opening your door for the coffee, for making me feel like the scared little girl inside me has somewhere safe to be. Becca, Daniel said softly. You said you came here because it was the last place you felt safe and happy. But maybe it's not the last place. Maybe it's the first place you start feeling that way again. Over the following weeks, Rebecca extended her stay in town, finding a small apartment and a job at the local elementary school, where her gift for connecting with children made her an instant favorite among both students and parents. Daniel and Sophie became her anchor points in this new life she was building, the family she had chosen rather than the one she had left behind. But what surprised everyone, including Rebecca and Daniel themselves, was how naturally they fell into a rhythm that felt less like rediscovered friendship and more like coming home to a love that had been patiently waiting for them to be ready for it. 6 months later, when Rebecca accepted Daniel's proposal in the same backyard where they'd played as children, Sophie was there to present her with a handmade card that read, "Welcome to our family forever." The 12-year-old girl who had knocked on doors looking for adventure had grown into a woman who knocked on doors looking for home and found that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that begin with "you feel familiar" and end with "you feel like home." Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring us back to where we started. But with eyes clear enough to see what was always meant to be ours. And sometimes the best answer to a midnight knock is simply to open the door and trust that the person standing there shivering and beautiful and somehow familiar might be exactly who you've been waiting for without knowing it.